benvenuto qui a Basilea Marco Lambertini.
Thank you very much, Janine, for the introduction. And Marco, thank you for hosting this wonderful event and for the invitation. Thank you all for attending this morning. My job today is to spice up your morning with an overview of our challenge/opportunity vis-à-vis a sustainable future. We are living in extraordinary times, and scientists are telling us that our civilization, for the first time in our history, is facing a number of critical choices. Choices that will determine whether we drive our society, our economy towards a sustainable way of living, reaching a turning point in our relationship with the planet, or whether we'll continue business as usual and will most likely reach a tipping point in many of the natural systems that today supports our life. As a species, as humans, we've been living 99% of our time deeply embedded in nature. 10,000 years ago, when we started agricultural revolution and domesticated livestock, we started our journey away from nature. And the journey has continued, accelerating dramatically over the last 60, 70 years. 60, 70 years, a blink of an eye compared to the history of our species, but also particularly the history of life on the planet. I was born around this time when also WWF was founded, the 60s, the early 60s. And this is when something extraordinary started. It's what the scientists are calling the demographic boom. It took 300,000 years to get to the first billion people on the planet, about 100 years to get to the second billion, and from the 1960s, we've been adding 1 billion new people every decade. And that's continuing to these days. Today, we are 8 billion on this planet, and the number is not just the driver of our dominance, of our impact on the planet. In fact, most importantly, is the consumption patterns. This is what scientists, again, are calling the great acceleration of use of resources. Almost anything you can think of, from energy, timber, fish, food, water, minerals, everything has followed the same acceleration, the same exponential acceleration path in terms of consumption. And of course, consumption particularly in the so-called developed economies, because today, still, there is a huge inequality in distribution of consumption patterns around the world. Population growth, consumption patterns, put together, are the foundation of the impact that we are having on the planet. An impact that has, first of all, altered today 75% of the land on Earth. 75% on our planet has been somehow altered, deeply or less deeply, by human activities. But not only the space, we have also altered the composition of the biosphere. This is, for me, one of the most shocking statistics I came across in the last few years. If you put together the biomass, the weight of humans and our domesticated animals, that accounts for 96% of all the weight on land of mammals. 40%, 4% is what is left of wild animals. The most shocking thing is that just 150 years ago, the picture was exactly the opposite. So what we're talking about here is a deep impact, but also a deep impact concentrated in an extremely short period of time. That's why scientists have coined a new term. We have the Jurassic as the dinosaurs age. Well, now we entered the Anthropocene, the age of humans. a geological era dominated by the impact of one species. But in all this, there is one first set of good news, and the good news is that today we know all this. We didn't know just 50 years ago. We didn't really understand the impact we were having on the planet. Today, we do. Today, we know that we have warmed the atmosphere almost close to 1.2 degrees Celsius, and we know that 1.5 is really danger zone. We know that we have brought to the brink of extinction 1 million species of wildlife. This is even bigger than the last mass extinction occurred naturally because of a meteorite 200 million years ago. And we know that many other things are happening, including undermining food security, like fish in the ocean or in the rivers and lakes where there's been a dramatic collapse. And we also know that all this is not just affecting species, pandas, tigers, but actually is beginning to affect systems, whether they are ecosystems like coral reefs or glaciers, an issue very close to you in Switzerland, or whether it is ecoregions like the Amazon or Southeast Asia or the northern tundra, or whether it is weather patterns like the Atlantic Gulf Stream or monsoon systems around the world. All these systems are beginning to destabilize. And ladies and gentlemen, the stability is the key word here. The stability of the natural world, the stability and predictability of rainfalls, of wind, of seasons, of many other weather systems has been the foundation of our success as a species. That has been, the planet has been stable exactly during the period when we have been evolving and developing dramatically. So, on one hand, there is no doubt that if you look at socioeconomic metrics, human development metrics, childbirth rate, education rate, extreme poverty, etc., lifespan of humans, all these metrics are actually improved dramatically over the last 60, 70 years, exactly during the great acceleration of development. So you can say that there's never been a better time for us, humans, today. But there is a hidden side of the story, is that the development of our society, of our economy, our well-being has been based until now on the destruction, on the impact, on the unsustainable use of natural resources. And so while our society has developed and improved in so many ways, nature has declined. And here we are, at a critical point where the destabilization of nature is beginning to affect our chances to continue to develop. And not only, it's beginning to affect even the progress that we have made until now. Climate change, probably the most direct impact on our society and economy today, is beginning already to invert, reverse the trend of economic development in many regions, particularly developing countries. Since in the last 10 years, the number of people in extreme poverty is increased for the first time in many, many decades. And that's because of droughts, of impact of climate change, failures of crops, starvation, etc., etc. So in a way, we have been managing our assets not very wisely. We have been able to increase our economic assets, but not so much the human assets. And that represents the inequality gap that we are now witnessing in the world. A minority of super wealthy, a majority of people that are still struggling. And then we have not managed well our natural capital, as I said earlier. We have abused and used unsustainably natural resources, and that's the ecological crisis. The inequality crisis, the social dimension, and the socioeconomic dimension, and the ecological crisis are the two crises interconnected that we have to face head on from now on, or else we're putting our future in jeopardy. The second good news is that we don't only know all this, but we're also beginning to understand the consequences that this is having, not just on the natural world, not just on tigers and pandas and elephants, but actually on us, on our future, on the future of our children and their children. That's a cultural revolution, which is happening as we speak. And that's why there are initiatives like Sustainability Days happening more and more often in many more and more countries and cities in the world, because we are beginning to realize that actually nature conservation is not just an ecological issue, is not just a moral issue to coexist with the rest of life on Earth, which we all love and we all have the duty to coexist with. Nature conservation is a security issue for humanity, for our society, for our economy, for our well-being. Economists, not conservationists, economists are beginning to calculate the risk associated to the loss of nature and the destabilization of climate. Half of the global GDP today is dependent on natural systems. Stability, productivity, health. Think about agriculture, think about fishing, think about tourism, think about all the industrial processes that require constant access to water flows, constant access to natural resources. We depend on nature, in fact, much more than nature depends on us. Not to mention the threats to our well-being and health, dramatically demonstrated by the COVID. The latest research has found clear evidence that the actual COVID-19 coronavirus has jumped from a wild animal traded in China, Wuhan market, to people. And from there has brought the whole of our society on its knees in a few months. This is the growth of zoonotic diseases like COVID and coronavirus, and is bound to increase as much as we are increasing our exposure to those viruses that normally are kept in check in the natural system where they are developed. But through deforestation, through wildlife trade, through intensive farming of animals, they are given highways into our economy, our society. And these viruses, from the deepest forest in Congo or the deepest forest in Southeast Asia, are brought to our societies everywhere in the world. This awareness of the risks of nature loss and climate change are increasing dramatically. This is the latest global risk report of the World Economic Forum. And you can see in the short term, there is half of the risks are actually related to environmental degradation, climate or nature or biodiversity. And in the long term, 6 out of 10 are considered top risks related to our unsustainable relationship with the planet. But it's not just about risks. It's also about opportunities. Opportunities to embrace transitions of all the key economic sectors that today are impacting nature and the climate towards something that can continue to develop, that continue to generate wealth and health in the human society, but not any longer at the expenses of nature. Decoupling economic and social development from nature destruction is the imperative of the next few decades. The big 5 sectors: food production, agriculture and fishing, forestry, mining, and infrastructure. And that's very relevant to the audience of this event as well. Infrastructure is a major sector that has the potential, perhaps even more easy than other sectors, to turn from a nature-negative sector to a nature-positive sector, a sector that builds infrastructure, avoiding, reducing, and compensating the impacts on the environment. So we're beginning to understand that actually within the Sustainable Development Goals framework, the foundation of a healthy society and a healthy economy is actually a healthy natural world, healthy natural systems that provide water, they provide food, they provide stability of the key systems of the natural world. So the 2 coins of the same challenge are climate change, that we talk a lot about, and this more subtle, the more silent, the less spoken about biodiversity crisis, the extinction of species, the destabilization and the loss of habitats, ecosystems. And this is our challenge. This is our plan. Our plan has to bend these 2 curves. Bend down the curve of emissions, bend up the curve of nature loss. And in other words, means that we need to head towards a carbon neutral and a nature positive world. For nature, nature neutral is not good enough. Nature can come back. Nature has proven to be able to regenerate itself very quickly if we give it a chance. And so, carbon neutral, net zero emissions by 2050, nature positive, net positive biodiversity in ecosystems by 2030. These are the two global goals now, by the way, agreed by the world leaders in Paris 10 years ago and in December last year in Montreal on biodiversity. That's nature positive. We are continuing to go down. We need to start reversing and have more nature, not less, by 2030, and continue to restore by 2050. How to do it? We know how to do it. First of all, we need to protect more of the nature left on the planet. There is a target agreed in December last year of 30% protection on land, in ocean, and river systems. That means that we need to double the number of protected areas on land and quadruple the one on the ocean in the next few years. It is possible, and it is necessary. The second one is to sustainably manage the rest. The rest of the planet needs to be sustainably managed, and we know also how to do that with the right investments and policies. And finally, but probably most critically, we need to really look at our production and consumption model and drive sustainable practices in the key sectors I mentioned earlier. Food is the top of the list, but as I said, many others are equally important. And to make all this happen, to drive these sectors to move from unsustainable to sustainable practices, financial flows are critical, obviously, are critical in directing, incentivizing. We are today spending, the public sector spends and invests in public subsidies $1.3 trillion a year in supporting harmful subsidies to nature. That can change. That can be redirected towards sustainable practices. That's exactly what we're beginning to see, for example, on fishing, we're beginning to see on other sectors as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, this was a general perspective of the challenge, because the data are truly terrifying, of the opportunities which are truly huge and necessary. And it's basically highlighting the fact that the dichotomy between conserving nature and supporting people's development is gone. Those days are gone. Nature and people are part of the same agenda. There is not going to be a nature positive, a people positive future without a nature positive one. And that's about our moral duty, our emotions about nature, so important driver, but equally they're about the value of nature, both emotional and material. And finally, this is not about wildlife. I'm from WWF, but what we are talking about here is not about wildlife, it's about life. It's about life, non-human, and the life of all of us, and particularly the future of our children. Thank you for your attention. I'm looking forward to this wonderful event and contributing to a nature-positive future. Thank you.